The kingdom had been quiet for a long time, but that quiet was broken one morning by alarming news. The Dragon Queen's son, a young boy of only 7 years, had disappeared from the royal palace. Whispers spread quickly through towns and villages. The boy had wandered into the mountains, a place few dared to go. These mountains were dangerous, home to wild dragons and treacherous cliffs. Everyone knew that no ordinary person could venture there safely. The queen had sent messages throughout the kingdom, offering a great reward to anyone brave enough to rescue her son. Knights polished their armor, preparing for the journey, but doubt clouded their minds. Merchants and farmers who might have once considered helping shook their heads. "It is impossible," they said. "Even the strongest warriors could not face those mountains. Dragons will tear anyone apart." Fear gripped the kingdom and the streets grew quiet. Parents held their children close and warned them not to wander far from home. Amid this chaos, far from the palace, a human single father was tending to his small farm. His name was David, and he lived in a simple house at the edge of a forest. He raised his little daughter Lily alone. Her mother had passed away when she was just a baby, leaving David with both grief and responsibility. Life had been hard, but David had always faced challenges calmly. He knew how to survive, how to care for his daughter, and how to find hope even in difficult times. One morning, as he fed the chickens and checked the small vegetable garden, a traveler came running through his yard. The man was out of breath and carried a message from the city. "The Dragon Queen's son is missing," the man shouted. "No one has dared go after him. The mountains are full of dragons. People are too afraid, but someone must rescue him, or he will not survive the night." David listened carefully. He held Lily close and thought about the news. Most people would have ignored it or turned away in fear. The knights were strong and many had tried, but no one had succeeded. Still, something stirred inside David. He had faced challenges in his life, big and small, and he knew what it meant to protect someone you love. Seeing his daughter's trusting eyes reminded him that courage was not only for the strong. Sometimes courage meant taking a step forward when everyone else was frozen in fear. For hours, David considered his options. He could stay home, tend the farm, and live quietly as usual. That was safe. But the thought of the young prince alone, surrounded by danger, made him uneasy. David was not a knight nor a trained fighter. He carried no sword and wore no armor. But he had something others often forgot: careful thinking, patience, and the ability to stay calm when others panicked. These qualities had helped him survive life's hardships, and now they could guide him through the mountains. As he packed some simple supplies, David spoke gently to Lily. "I must go help someone, sweetheart. It is dangerous, but I promise to be careful. You will stay here with our home safe and warm." Lily's big eyes widened, but she nodded slowly. She trusted her father completely, knowing that he always made the right decisions. Holding her tiny hand for a moment, David felt a wave of determination. He would do what no one else dared to try. The journey began that evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. David carried only what he needed: a small bag of food, a rope, a lantern, and a blanket. Lily stayed at home as promised, and he whispered her name as he walked toward the dark mountains. The path was uneven, full of rocks and loose soil. Trees blocked the fading sunlight, and strange sounds echoed through the forest. Owls hooted, and somewhere in the distance the wind carried a deep roar that made David pause. Dragons. The father's heart pounded, but he did not stop. He remembered the lessons of patience and careful observation. He watched the trees, noticing movement in the branches. He listened to the sounds of the forest, distinguishing between ordinary animals and the deep rumbling growls of dragons. Unlike others who rushed into danger with swords and shields, David moved slowly, quietly, thinking with each step. He knew that fear could make a person reckless, but calmness could save a life. Night fell completely, and the mountains became even more dangerous. Shadows grew long and twisted, and David had to rely on his instincts. He followed small trails, looking for footprints, signs of recent movement, and even broken branches. Every detail mattered. Somewhere ahead he glimpsed smoke rising from a small cave. Could it be the prince? He could not be sure, but he approached cautiously, keeping low and making no sudden movements. As he drew closer, he saw the faint outline of the boy sitting near the cave's entrance. The child looked frightened, holding a small wooden toy. David's heart ached at the sight. Most people would have turned away, thinking it too dangerous, thinking the dragons would surely attack. But David felt no hesitation. He knelt at a distance and spoke softly. trying to make the boy feel safe. "I am here to help," he said. "I will not hurt you. My name is David, and I will get you home." The boy's eyes widened, and for a moment he did not move. Then slowly he nodded. The dragons were not near yet, but David knew they could appear at any moment. Using slow and careful movements, he extended a hand, showing that he meant no harm. The boy reached out, trembling, and David helped him to his feet. This was only the beginning. The real challenge was still ahead, carrying the boy safely back through the dangerous mountains. But for the first time, hope shone in the darkness. David took a deep breath and began leading the boy along the path. Every step required caution. Loose rocks threatened to slide underfoot, and every sound could signal a nearby dragon. Yet the father moved steadily, showing patience and courage that others had lacked. As he walked, he glanced at the boy and whispered encouragements. The prince began to trust him, following closely and learning to stay calm even in fear. That first night was just the beginning of a long journey. But already David had shown something remarkable. Even a single human father holding love and courage in his heart could stand where others failed. The kingdom would not yet know how extraordinary this man was, but soon his actions would change everything. The Dragon Queen's son was safe for now, and hope, fragile but real, had returned to the hearts of all who feared for him. The first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. David and the Dragon Queen's son had spent the night in a small clearing, hidden from view. Though they had survived the initial encounter, the journey ahead was far from over. David knew the mountains were unpredictable. Steep cliffs, sudden drops, and wild creatures made every step dangerous. Yet he remained calm, reminding himself that fear could make the smallest mistake deadly. The boy, whose name was Kale, watched David carefully. He had never met a human like this before, someone willing to risk so much for another. Most people he knew had been too afraid to come near, and even the bravest knights had retreated. But David's calm voice and gentle actions had made Kale feel safe. For the first time since he had been lost, the boy felt a glimmer of hope. "Are the dragons still near?" Kale asked softly, his voice trembling. David shook his head. "Not right now, but we must be careful. They watch over this mountain. They notice everything. If we move slowly and quietly, we can stay safe." He adjusted the small bag on his shoulder and looked at Kale with reassuring eyes. "Stay close to me and do exactly what I say. We will get through this together." The boy nodded, clutching a small wooden charm his mother had given him before he left the palace. David noticed it and smiled softly. "That charm is lucky," he said. "Keep it close. It will remind you of home, and it will give us strength." Kyle smiled faintly, a small sense of comfort spreading through his fear. Their journey resumed along a narrow mountain path. Rocks shifted underfoot, and the early morning mist made the ground slippery. David moved slowly, testing each step before placing his weight, guiding Kyle carefully behind him. Several times they had to stop to avoid loose stones or to wait for the distant sound of a dragon's roar to fade. David's careful movements and patience ensured that they remained unnoticed. At one point they reached a small stream that cut across the path. The water was cold and clear, rushing quickly over smooth stones. David knew they had to cross, but he also knew that rushing could lead to disaster. He bent down and tested the stones, finding a safe path. "Step on these carefully," he instructed. "Hold my hand." Kyle followed every instruction, and together they crossed without incident. The boy began to trust David more with each step, understanding that his safety depended on patience as much as courage. The mountains grew steeper as they climbed higher. The air became thinner, making each breath a little more difficult. David felt the strain but kept a steady pace, pausing only to let Kale rest and drink water. He shared stories quietly, telling Kale about his daughter Lily, about the farm, and about times when he had faced challenges and survived. These stories were not just to pass time. They were lessons in courage, hope, and careful thinking. Hours passed and the sun reached its peak. The father and boy reached a ledge that overlooked a deep valley. Below, the shadows of dragons moved across the rocky terrain. David motioned for Kale to stay close and silent. He studied the dragons carefully, noticing their patterns. They were not attacking but patrolling. Most humans would have panicked at the sight, but David remained calm. He knew fear would be their enemy. "We need to wait for the dragons to move away," David whispered. "We cannot rush. We have to watch and understand." Kyle nodded, gripping his charm tightly. He was learning that bravery was not just about running toward danger, it was about knowing when to act and when to wait. As the dragons moved, a sudden gust of wind swept across the ledge, threatening to push Cale off balance. David reacted quickly, grabbing the boy and holding him tightly. "Careful," he said, steadying him. Cale's heart raced, but he felt secure in David's hands. It was a lesson in trust, and he knew that relying on others did not make him weak. It could save his life. After the dragons moved out of sight, they continued their journey. David noticed small tracks in the dirt, a sign that someone had passed this way before. He followed them carefully, using his knowledge of nature to guide their path. Hours later, they came upon a narrow cave, hidden by rocks and shadow. It was not the safest place to rest, but it offered shelter from the harsh sun and from wandering dragons. David led Kyle inside, making a small area with his blanket where they could sit and eat a little. "Do you want to know a secret?" David asked as they rested. "I have never rescued anyone like this before, but when I saw you, I felt that I could not turn away. Courage is not about fighting dragons. It is about doing what is right even when everyone else is afraid." Kyle looked up at him, eyes wide. "I thought everyone would leave me here," he admitted softly. "I thought no one cared." David smiled gently. "I care," he said. "And not just for you. I care because it is right to help someone in need. That is what makes a person strong." The boy nodded slowly, beginning to understand the meaning of true bravery. As they prepared to leave the cave, the sky darkened. Clouds gathered and the first drops of rain began to fall. The mountains could be unforgiving in a storm, and David knew they had to move carefully. He wrapped Kyle in the blanket, keeping him dry, and led the way along a safer path. The rain made the rocks slippery, and David's careful steps kept them from slipping or making noise. Each step was deliberate, each movement calculated. Suddenly, they heard a low growl nearby. A dragon had noticed their presence, drawn by movement or sound. David stopped immediately and crouched, pulling Cale close. He spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Stay still. Do not move. Watch me." The dragon approached, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. David's calmness seemed to confuse the creature. He held Cale tightly, showing no fear. After a tense moment, the dragon shifted its attention and moved away, uninterested in the pair. David let out a quiet sigh of relief. "See? Patience and calm can protect us better than fear ever will." The father and boy continued through the rain, the clouds heavy with water, the path slippery and narrow. Every step tested their courage and endurance. David knew that this journey was not just about rescuing Kyle, it was also about teaching him lessons of patience, trust, and courage. The boy, though young, was learning quickly. He began to understand that even the smallest human could face mountains and dragons when they moved with care and thought. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving a soft mist over the mountains. David and Cale found a safer spot to rest for the night, protected from the wind and hidden from view. They shared a small meal, and David told more stories about life on his farm, about the people he loved, and about the power of hope. Cale listened intently, comforted by the presence of someone who cared so deeply. As the night fell, David looked up at the stars. The journey ahead was still long and dangerous, but he felt ready. He had a clear mind, a careful plan, and a boy who trusted him completely. This was only the beginning, but already he had proven that courage could be quiet, patient, and kind, and that even in the face of dragons, hope could guide the way. The next morning, the mist still clung to the mountains, hiding the peaks in a soft gray blanket. David and Cale woke early, knowing that the journey would grow more dangerous with each passing hour. The boy had begun to understand the rhythm of the mountains, the careful steps, the listening, the watching. Each sound could be a warning, each shadow a sign. David had taught him patience, and Cale was learning to follow without fear. They started along a narrow trail that twisted along a steep cliff. The path was so thin that one wrong step could send them tumbling into the valley far below. David held Cale's hand firmly, guiding him with gentle, steady movements. "Take it slow," he said. "Don't rush. Look at each step before you move." The boy followed carefully, trusting David completely. The mountains seemed alive, and not in a friendly way. Winds howled through the jagged rocks, carrying distant roars that reminded them of the dragon's presence. David paused often, listening, smelling the air, and studying the terrain. He knew that every creature in these mountains had its pattern. Every shadow told a story. Unlike others who might have panicked, he relied on understanding, not strength alone. Hours passed, and they reached a small ledge that overlooked a deep gorge. The wind whipped around them, sharp and cold. Below, a dragon circled lazily, its wings slicing through the air. David crouched low, keeping Cale close. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "We need to wait until it moves away." The boy's eyes were wide, but he remained still. He had learned that silence and patience were sometimes more powerful than running or fighting. Finally, the dragon flew off, disappearing into the distance. David breathed a quiet sigh of relief. "Now we move," he said softly. Step by careful step, they crossed the ledge. The path was slippery from the previous day's rain, but David's steady movements guided them safely. Cale began to notice the small signs David used, loose stones that indicated a safe foothold, the way plants bent to mark the wind's direction, the sounds of distant creatures. He was learning more than just survival. He was learning courage. As they descended into a narrow valley, David spotted footprints in the mud. They were small, too small for a dragon, too delicate for an adult human. Kyle looked at them with curiosity. "Are those his?" he asked. David nodded. "Yes, these tracks belong to the prince. Someone brought him here recently. That means we are close." The boy's eyes lit up. Hope surged in his heart, but David reminded him to stay calm. Excitement could be dangerous in these mountains. They followed the tracks carefully, moving slowly, listening to every sound. The valley opened into a small clearing, hidden by tall rocks. A fire smoldered in the center, sending a thin trail of smoke upward. David crouched behind a boulder, peering through a gap. There, tied lightly to a post, sat the Dragon Queen's son. He looked frightened but unharmed. His wide eyes scanned the area, and for a moment he froze when he saw the humans approaching. David assessed the situation quickly. The fire was small, but it could draw attention. The prince was alone, which meant they had a chance to rescue him without alerting any dragons. But the path back would be dangerous, and the mountains offered many hiding spots for danger. He needed a careful plan. "Kyle," he whispered, kneeling beside the boy. "Do not speak. Do exactly as I say. We are going to be very quiet. We cannot let anyone know we are here." The boy nodded, gripping the charm around his neck tightly. David moved forward, taking care to step only on rocks and dirt that would not make noise. He reached the prince slowly, keeping his movements gentle and calm. "I am here to help," he said softly. "Do not be afraid. My name is David, and I will get you home safely." The prince's eyes widened. He had heard of many knights and warriors, but none had come close enough to help before. Something in David's calm voice made him trust this human immediately. He nodded slowly, and David untied the ropes. "We must move carefully," David reminded him. "Follow me exactly." The prince obeyed, stepping cautiously behind David as they prepared to leave the clearing. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the rocks. One of the dragons, alerted by movement or smell, had noticed them. Its wings stretched wide, and its eyes gleamed in the sunlight. David froze, holding the boys close. His mind worked quickly. Rushing would bring disaster. He needed patience. He knelt and whispered to the prince, "Stay behind me. Do not move. Watch my hand signals." David lifted one hand slowly, signaling the boys to crouch lower. The dragon's attention shifted, its head scanning the clearing. David stayed perfectly still, showing no fear. Slowly, inch by inch, they began to move, hugging the shadows of the rocks, moving toward the narrow path that would take them out of sight. The dragon growled, but it did not attack immediately. It seemed curious, confused by the human's calm behavior. David whispered to Cale, "Step carefully. Keep your feet light. Trust me." Each step was slow, deliberate, but the boys moved steadily. The dragon followed for a moment, then, distracted by a sudden noise elsewhere, it turned away. David exhaled quietly. They had passed the first real test. The journey through the mountains continued. They climbed higher, crossed shallow streams, and navigated narrow ledges. David used every skill he had learned in life: observation, patience, careful planning to keep the boys safe. Cale noticed that every movement, every pause was intentional. Courage was not loud or reckless. It was quiet, steady, and careful. By late afternoon, they reached a safer area, a small grove surrounded by thick trees and rocks. The prince, exhausted but unharmed, sat down to rest. David unpacked a small meal and shared it with both boys. The prince looked at David with wonder. "I thought no one would come," he said softly. "I thought I was lost forever." David smiled gently. "I promise to help. Courage is not about being fearless, it is about doing what is right even when it is hard. You trusted me, and that trust kept us safe." The prince's eyes sparkled with understanding. He was learning that bravery could take many forms and that humans, though small, could face even dragons with patience and wisdom. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and orange, David knew they were still far from safety. The most dangerous part of the journey lay ahead, the return through the steep cliffs and dragon territories. But he felt ready. He had two boys who trusted him completely, a careful plan, and the courage to face whatever came next. That night, as they rested under the shelter of trees, David looked up at the stars. The journey had tested their strength, patience, and trust, but it had also created bonds that would last forever. The Dragon Queen's son was no longer alone, and Kale had seen firsthand the power of quiet courage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, they rested. The mountains were still dangerous, the dragons still near, but David had proven that even one human, calm and determined, could stand where others had failed. And with that thought, he closed his eyes, ready to face the next day's trials. The next morning, the mountains were silent, but the air was thick with tension. David, holding the Dragon Queen's son carefully by the hand, led Kyle along the narrow path. Each step was deliberate, each movement careful. The father knew that the hardest part of the journey lay ahead. Returning through the mountains meant facing steeper cliffs, slippery rocks, and dragons more alert than ever. But David had a plan, and patience would be their greatest ally. The boys followed closely behind, trusting him completely. The Dragon Queen's son, though young, had begun to understand that fear could not guide them. His eyes were wide, but he moved steadily, following David's instructions without hesitation. Kale, too, had learned to stay calm, to watch and listen, and to move only when David signaled. The mountains tested them at every turn, but their careful movements kept them safe. As they climbed a particularly steep ridge, the ground beneath them loosened. A sudden shift of stones made the path treacherous. David stopped immediately, crouching low to steady the boys. "Watch your footing," he whispered. "Step slowly and hold onto the rope." He had tied a small rope to a sturdy rock earlier, creating a simple handhold to guide them across the most dangerous parts. The boys clutched the rope tightly, moving carefully one by one. Halfway across the ridge, a shadow passed overhead. A dragon, larger than any they had seen before, circled above, scanning the ridge for movement. Its wings cast enormous shadows on the rocks, and its roar echoed through the mountains. The boys froze, but David remained calm. He whispered, "Stay low. Move with me. Do not make any sudden sounds." Step by careful step, he guided the boys forward, keeping their movements slow and steady. The dragon paused above them, wings outstretched, its eyes glimmering like molten gold. David could feel the heat of its presence, but he did not panic. He used what he had learned from watching the dragons: movement and patience, not confrontation. Slowly, inch by inch, they reached the next safe spot, crouching behind a boulder to catch their breath. "That was close," Kale whispered. David smiled softly. "Yes, but we stayed calm and we moved carefully. That kept us safe. Remember this. Courage is not running into danger blindly. Courage is knowing how to act when danger is near." The boys nodded, absorbing the lesson. Every moment in the mountains was a test, and they were learning how to survive through wisdom, not just strength. The next challenge came in the form of a narrow gorge. Below, a rushing river cut through the valley, its waters churning and foaming. The only way across was a fallen tree, stretched thin over the current. David examined it carefully. The tree looked strong enough, but one misstep could send them plunging into the icy water. "Kale, stay close," David instructed. "The prince, follow me slowly. We go one at a time. Watch your steps." He placed his foot on the tree first, testing its strength, and then shifted his weight slowly. Inch by inch, he moved forward, feeling the tree bend slightly but hold firm. The Dragon Queen's son followed, stepping cautiously with each movement David indicated. Kale went last, gripping the rope David had tied as a guide. Halfway across, the tree creaked loudly. The dragon from earlier had noticed their movement and circled closer, its keen eyes watching every step. The boys froze, hearts pounding, but David stayed calm. he whispered encouragement, keeping their focus on steady steps. The tree held, and with patience and courage, all three reached the other side safely. The boys let out quiet sighs of relief, their trust in David growing stronger with each challenge. After crossing the gorge, the path became narrower, twisting along the edge of cliffs with sheer drops on either side. David knew they were close to leaving the mountains, but he also knew that the dragons would be more alert, sensing movement along their territory. He signaled the boys to move slowly, crouching low and keeping to the shadows. Every step required concentration. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the cliffs. A pair of dragons had spotted them. One lunged forward, wings flapping powerfully, while the other circled above, eyes locked on their small group. David froze for a moment, calculating the safest path. Running would provoke an attack. Staying still might buy them a chance. He whispered quickly, "Follow me, stay low. Trust me." David led the boys along a narrow crevice in the rocks, barely wide enough for them to move in single file. The dragons swooped closer, their roars filling the air. The father kept calm, using the rocks as shields, moving silently and deliberately. He encouraged the boys with soft whispers, keeping their focus on the path ahead rather than the danger above. After what felt like hours, though it had only been minutes, the dragons lost interest and soared away, distracted by movement elsewhere. David exhaled quietly. "See? Patience and careful planning always work. We do not need to fight. We only need to be smart." The boys nodded, hearts still racing but filled with confidence. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the mountains. David spotted a familiar path leading down toward the forest at the base of the cliffs. Safety was near, but he remained cautious. The last stretch could be deceiving, with hidden obstacles and uneven terrain. He signaled the boys to stay close and move carefully. Step by step they descended, navigating roots, rocks, and loose soil. As they reached the forest edge, the sounds of the mountains faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of trees and the calls of birds. The air felt warmer, softer, and safer. David stopped for a moment, letting the boys catch their breath. The Dragon Queen's son looked up at him with admiration and gratitude. "You saved me," he said softly. "I thought no one would ever come." David smiled gently. "We saved each other. Courage comes in many forms. Today, you saw that even when others are afraid, someone can step forward and do what is right." Kale nodded in agreement, realizing that bravery was not about fighting dragons alone. It was about patience, wisdom, and helping others. They continued through the forest, the path now much easier and safer. Birds flew overhead and the sounds of running water guided their way. David kept a steady pace, never letting the boys wander too far. The mountains had tested them in every way, through fear, danger, and uncertainty, but they had made it through together. Finally, as twilight approached, they reached the open fields near the kingdom's edge. The sight of familiar landmarks, distant villages, and the soft glow of lights in the windows filled their hearts with relief. David knelt, letting the boys see the stars above them. "We made it," he said softly. "This is what courage looks like. Not just strength, but calm, careful steps and trust." The Dragon Queen's son and Kale smiled, feeling safe for the first time in days. They had faced dragons, cliffs, rivers, and fear itself, and survived. But more than survival, they had learned lessons of trust, patience, and bravery that would stay with them forever. David, the single father, had not only rescued the prince, he had shown the boys that courage could be quiet, steady and kind even in the most dangerous of places. That night, as they rested safely near the kingdom's borders, David knew that the journey was nearly complete. The final step, returning the prince to his mother, would be met with joy, gratitude, and recognition. But for him, the greatest reward was not honor or riches. It was the knowledge that even one human, armed with courage, patience, and love, could face what no one else dared. The first light of morning bathed the kingdom in a soft glow. David, holding the Dragon Queen's son's hand gently, stepped cautiously toward the palace gates. Kale walked beside them, the young boy's eyes shining with admiration for the man who had guided them through the mountains. Every step brought them closer to safety, to the place where fear and uncertainty would finally be replaced by relief and joy. Word had already spread through the kingdom that someone had ventured into the dangerous mountains. The news reached the palace before David and the boys arrived. Courtiers and guards gathered at the gates, their faces filled with disbelief and hope. Many had not believed anyone could survive the treacherous journey, let alone rescue the Dragon Queen's son. The streets were quiet as villagers peeked from windows, eager to witness the return of the prince. As David approached, the guards bowed, unsure of how to react. They had heard stories of knights and warriors attempting the rescue and failing, but here was a single human father, carrying hope in his heart, leading two boys safely down from the mountains. The Dragon Queen herself appeared, her eyes wide with amazement. Her son ran to her first, holding out his small hands in relief and gratitude. "Mother," the prince cried. "He saved me. This man, he saved me." The queen's eyes softened as she looked at David, taking in the sight of the tired but triumphant man standing before her. She approached slowly, her royal robes brushing the ground. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You faced the mountains and the dragons alone?" David bowed slightly, keeping his humility. "I only did what I could to help," he said simply. "The prince trusted me, and together we found a safe path. Courage is not about fighting alone. It is about doing what is right and staying calm when danger is near." The queen's son hugged David tightly. "Thank you. You saved my life. I was so scared, but you didn't give up. You were brave for me." David smiled gently and patted the boy's back. He looked down at Cale, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. The boy nodded, understanding that bravery came in many forms and that courage often meant guiding others safely through fear. The Dragon Queen stepped closer, her expression softening. "You have done what no one else could," she said, her voice full of respect. "You are not a knight, not a soldier, yet you ventured where many feared to tread. For this I offer my deepest gratitude. You have saved my son and shown that courage and wisdom can overcome even the greatest dangers." David shook his head gently. "I do not seek rewards," he said. "Seeing the prince safe is enough for me. My true reward is knowing that I did what was right." The queen studied him carefully and then smiled warmly. "You are a rare soul," she said. "Your humility is as remarkable as your courage. The kingdom will remember your deeds, and your story will inspire others to act bravely when faced with fear." The gates of the palace opened wider, and David led the boys inside. Courtiers and villagers who had gathered stepped back in awe. The air was filled with whispers of amazement. People could hardly believe that a single human father had achieved what no trained warrior had dared attempt. David, however, remained calm, showing no pride beyond the quiet satisfaction of having done the right thing. Inside the palace, the Dragon Queen's son recounted the journey to his mother, describing the mountains, the dragons, and the careful steps that had kept them safe. He spoke of the calm, steady presence of David, who had guided them without fear or hesitation. The queen listened attentively, her heart filled with gratitude and admiration. She placed a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "You have proven that even one human can make a difference. You have shown that courage is measured not by strength alone, but by patience, wisdom, and love." Cale watched silently, inspired by what he had witnessed. He realized that bravery was not only about daring feats or daring battles. It was about kindness, careful thought, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. He felt a deep respect for David and the lessons he had learned throughout their journey. Later, the queen hosted a small gathering to honor David. She presented him with a medal of courage and a simple gift of gold, though he politely declined the wealth. Instead, he asked only for a safe path back to his home, so he could continue caring for his daughter Lily. The queen nodded, understanding that this man valued family, love, and duty above riches or glory. Word of David's journey spread quickly through the kingdom. Songs were sung in his honor and stories were told around hearths and fires. Children listened wide-eyed, learning that even ordinary humans could face extraordinary challenges if they acted with calmness and courage. Adults nodded, inspired to approach fear with wisdom rather than panic. The tale of a single father rescuing the Dragon Queen's son became legend, not for violence or power, but for quiet bravery and selfless action. David returned home shortly after, his heart light and full. Lily ran to meet him, her small arms wrapping tightly around his legs. "Daddy, you're back!" "Did you save him?" she asked eagerly. David smiled down at her and hugged her gently. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "We did what was right, and now everyone is safe." That evening, David and Lily sat by the fire sharing a simple meal. He told her stories of the mountains, of dragons, and of the lessons he had learned. He spoke of patience, trust, and courage, showing her that even in the darkest moments hope and wisdom could guide the way. Lily listened intently, learning that bravery often comes quietly, in thoughtful steps and gentle actions. The Dragon Queen's son visited occasionally, and over time, a strong bond formed between the children. Kale and the prince became friends, united by the extraordinary experience they had shared and the man who had protected them both. The queen herself expressed her gratitude repeatedly, ensuring that David's courage and wisdom would be remembered for generations. Through it all, David remained humble. He had faced dragons, cliffs, rivers, and fear itself, but he had done so with patience, love, and careful planning. His story became a symbol of hope, showing the kingdom that courage was not only in knights and warriors, but also in ordinary people who acted with kindness and determination. And so life returned to normal on the farm. David cared for Lily, taught her lessons of love and bravery, and remembered the mountains as a place where ordinary humans could perform extraordinary deeds. The kingdom remained safe, the Dragon Queen's son thrived, and David's quiet courage left an imprint on the hearts of all who heard the tale. In the end, the greatest reward was not the recognition or the gifts. It was the knowledge that one human had dared to step forward when others would not, showing that even the smallest act of courage could change everything. The mountains, the dragons, and the challenges of the journey became memories, but the lessons of bravery, patience, and love stayed forever.